Once again, I want to invite you on a journey through part of the book of Revelation. I'm Dr. Bruce Metzger. Today we take up chapters 4 and 5 of the book of Revelation. The previous two chapters are focused here on earth. They refer to conditions of the 7 churches located in Western Asia Minor. Chapters 4 and 5 for today focus on heaven. They tell us of John's vision of God on a throne and of the Lamb of God, who of course is Jesus Christ. Until now, the symbols have been relatively straightforward and their meaning relatively easy to understand. From here onwards, they will become more difficult and more complex. Nevertheless, by using a disciplined imagination, I think we can follow the author's meaning, at least to some degree. John begins by saying that he saw a door opened in heaven, and he heard a loud trumpet-like voice saying, "Come up hither, and I will show you what must take place after this." In the Greek language in which the book of Revelation was written, the word translated open signifies not only that the door to heaven stood open, but that it remains open. Thus the way is clear for others, as well as the author, to appreciate the splendor and majesty of the heavenly scene. Having fallen into a trance, John sees in heaven a throne and one seated on the throne. Here the New Revised Standard Version punctuates the sentence with an exclamation mark in order to suggest something of the profound awe that John experienced in the vision. In what follows, the author attempts to describe the indescribable mystery of God. In accordance with the reluctance of Jewish writers to picture God, John carefully avoids any descriptive detail. No form is visible. The writer refrains even from mentioning the august name of God. He says that the one seated on the throne looks like jasper and carnelian. These are two precious stones. There are several kinds of what in ancient time was called jasper, but probably John has in mind a translucent gemstone, clear as crystal. When this is polished, it sparkles and flashes with glittering beams of light. Is not this a beautiful and poetic way to draw attention to what other biblical writers refer to as the holiness and the glory of God? In addition to jasper, John tells us that God looks like carnelian. Now, carnelian has a deep, ruddy red color. If you hold a carnelian in your hand, it looks as though a fire is smoldering inside the stone. Does John mean to suggest that in addition to the holiness of God, like jasper, God also burns in wrath against sin? If this is what is suggested, then John's conception of God is altogether like that of other biblical authors. Continuing to contemplate the vision of God, seated on the throne, John notices that around the throne is a rainbow that looks like an emerald. We recall that for the Jews, the rainbow was a sign of the covenant of God's mercy. According to the book of Genesis in chapter 9, after the flood, God declared to Noah that he would put his bow in the clouds. And though humankind might again fall into grievous sin, God would never again destroy the earth with a deluge, but would remember his covenant and show mercy. So when John says that he saw a rainbow arching over the throne of God, he is suggesting that God is merciful in all that God does. John, of course, knew that a rainbow has a whole spectrum of colors, but he says that this rainbow is emerald green in color. Green is soothing, like meadows and distant forests. Could this mean that after John had been exposed to the brilliance of God's holiness and the heat of God's wrath against sin, then John was soothed and comforted by the assurance of divine mercy that overarches all of God's deeds? If we are correct in understanding the import of John's words, then we can appreciate that his conception of the nature of God is altogether like the theology taught elsewhere in the Scriptures. The difference involves only the manner in which John expresses himself, namely, by means of wonderful poetic symbolism. Such a description would come as a tonic to those persecuted Christians, reminding them of the splendor and majesty and power of God, projected by the scintillating images of the divine presence and the radiance surrounding the throne. We must acknowledge, however, that other parts of this description of John's vision are less clear to us. The precise meaning of some of the details is anybody's guess. Who are the 24 elders that surround the throne of God? Some commentators suggest that they are angels, but this is not very likely, since the elders and the angels are mentioned separately in 5 verse 11. Why are they 24 in number? Perhaps because they represent the 12 patriarchs of the Old Testament and the 12 apostles of the New Testament. Now, John's description of the 4 living creatures, one on each side of the throne, has a literary background. His description derives from the first chapter of the book of Ezekiel. These 4 living creatures represent the cherubim, though John also supplies some of the features of the seraphim from Isaiah's vision of God in the temple, high and lifted up. The cherubim were not at all like chubby infants advertising baby soap, but they appear to be God's strong agents representing power over all the created world. The 4 living creatures in John's vision have the appearance of a lion, an ox, a human being, and a flying eagle. In subsequent centuries, it was customary to associate these 4 figures with the 4 evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Such association is entirely fanciful, and yet it has influenced many forms of Christian art. Joined by the 24 elders and the 4 living creatures, they give voice to 2 songs, probably examples of early congregational praise. One of the hymns begins, "Holy, holy, holy," and celebrates the otherness of God, that is, the distinction between the infinite and all finite beings. The second hymn praises God as Creator. "You are worthy, O Lord our God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created." Now the account of John's vision continues in chapter 5, when John's attention is drawn to the scroll that is held in the right hand of the one seated on the throne. This was written on the inside and on the back, and was sealed with 7 seals. The scroll is a book of eternal decrees of God. The fact that there were 7 seals indicates that its contents are completely hidden, so that no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look into it. Now John begins to weep bitterly because no one is worthy to open the scroll or able to carry out God's plan for human history. Then one of the elders said, "Do not weep. Look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has won the victory and can break the 7 seals and open the scroll." What follows is altogether unexpected. John looked to see the lion, and he sees a lamb. He looked to see power and force by which the enemies of his faith would be destroyed. And he sees love and gentleness as the way to win the victory. The might of Christ is a power of love. Most Jewish people had been looking for a Messiah who would break the yoke of Roman imperial power and liberate their people. The expressions Lion of the tribe of Judah and Root of David were recognized as scriptural references pointing to the coming Messiah. But the fundamental transformation of the messianic expectation became obvious on that first Palm Sunday when Jesus presented himself as God's Messiah. Jesus rode into Jerusalem not on a war horse equipped with all kinds of armor, but he rode in on a donkey, a symbol of peace and humility. Instead of a ferocious lion that hurts others, the Messiah is a sacrificial lamb that takes into himself the hurts of others. According to Isaiah chapter 53, which colors Christian understanding of the mission of Jesus, "He was wounded for our transgressions, and he was bruised for our iniquities. And by his bruises we are healed." Perhaps we can appreciate something of the quite staggering effect of this transformation of images. Here the Lamb, who alone in all the universe is able to understand the hidden decrees of God, and who alone is able to put them into effect, came and took the scroll from the right hand of him who is seated on the throne. Now don't ask how a 4-hoofed creature can take a scroll and open its seals. The poetic symbolism of the author is heightened still further when the Lamb is described as having 7 horns and 7 eyes. This symbolic description is not to be taken as a literal description. Rather, the 7 horns mean that Christ has complete power, and the 7 eyes mean that he sees and knows all things. Now, in opening the scroll, the Lamb is about to put into effect what the scroll contains. In short, Jesus did not change the divine plan. He opens the scroll and unfolds its eternal and unchangeable nature by his obedience, even obedience unto death on the cross. No wonder there is praise in heaven, accompanied by incense and harps. The 24 elders fall down before the Lamb, each holding a harp and golden bowls of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. Here is John's first hint of the participation of the church's worship on earth with the worship of the church in heaven. This idea appears also, you know, near the close of the Apostles' Creed, when we confess that we believe in the communion of saints. This communion of saints is not just the fellowship we enjoy with each other people during a service of worship, but the communion of saints includes also the idea that John expresses here, the unity of worship of the church militant on earth with that of the church triumphant in heaven. Our prayers here on earth are mingled with the worship of angels and archangels and all of the host of heaven in adoration of God and of the Lamb. In words that remind us of the praise offered to God for having created all things, which we read earlier, so now a new song is sung in honor of the Lamb. You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed for God saints from every tribe and language and people and nation. Here there is a hint that just as the Passover lamb's blood protected the firstborn of the Israelites from the plague of death, so too the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world will protect the faithful from the wrath to come. And so, with these glorious affirmations of the goodness and mercy of God and of the Lamb ringing in John's ears, he can look with confidence on the horrors about to be let loose on the world described in the following chapters.